What happens when a self-made CEO, fed up with rising losses, disguises himself as a low-level employee to uncover the shocking truth? You won't believe what he discovers, or the jaw-dropping revenge he takes to teach his staff an unforgettable lesson. This story will have you questioning everything about loyalty, trust, and second chances. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss how this ends. Tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will leave you speechless. The office buzzed with its usual energy, a blend of ringing phones, clattering keyboards, and the low hum of conversations weaving through the open-plan workspace. Ethan Mitchell, the company's founder and CEO, strode through the maze of desks, his polished leather shoes clicking softly against the tiled floor. His tailored navy suit and sharp gaze exuded an air of quiet authority. But there was something beneath his calm demeanor, an unease he couldn't quite shake. Ethan had always taken pride in his company, the product of years of sacrifice and determination. He had started small, working late nights in his cramped apartment, every penny meticulously accounted for. Those early struggles fueled his drive to build something lasting, something meaningful. Now, as he walked past the rows of employees, some engrossed in work, others casually chatting, he couldn't help but feel a disconnect. Somewhere along the line, the personal touch he'd once prided himself on seemed to have slipped away. The numbers had been gnawing at him for weeks. Inventory reports didn't add up. Expenses were creeping higher without explanation. At first, he dismissed it as clerical errors or inefficiencies, but a nagging voice in the back of his mind wouldn't let it go. That morning, during a meeting with his operations team, he'd pointed out the discrepancies, his tone calm but firm. His managers had exchanged uneasy glances, muttering vague reassurances, but no one offered a concrete answer. It was after the meeting, as he passed through the break room on his way to his office, that he overheard the conversation. Two employees stood near the coffee machine, their voices low but laced with humor. "Did you see Cameron? He's getting bold," Ian once said, stifling a laugh. "Took 2 bottles right out of the stockroom yesterday. Said he deserved them." The other chuckled, shaking their head. "Well, perks of the job, right?" Ethan froze just outside the doorway, his chest tightening. He couldn't see their faces, but the casual tone of their exchange made his stomach churn. Perks of the job? He'd worked too hard to let something like this slide. He backed away silently, retreating to his office, the words replaying in his mind like a broken record. By the time he sat at his desk, he knew he couldn't rely on reports or second-hand accounts to figure out what was happening. If theft or dishonesty was creeping into his company, he needed to see it for himself. The decision came to him swiftly, almost instinctively. He would go undercover. It wasn't just about uncovering the truth. It was about reconnecting with the heart of his business, the people who made it run day to day. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered if he'd lost touch with them, if the growing gap between him and his employees had allowed this behavior to fester. That night, Ethan sat in his home office, his laptop glowing softly in the dim light. He studied photos of himself online, scrutinizing his clean-cut appearance. With a few changes, a shorter haircut, a scruffier beard, and some well-worn clothes, he could blend into the warehouse staff. He'd learned every job in the company when it first started. He could do it again, and no one would suspect a thing. As he planned the transformation, memories of his early years flooded back. He'd been one of them once, working long hours, sweating over heavy boxes, and feeling the sting of every dollar lost. It hadn't been easy, but it had been honest. Somewhere deep inside, he wondered if his employees felt that same pride, or if he had failed to nurture it as the company grew. The next morning, Ethan arrived early, his usual polished look replaced by faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and scuffed sneakers. He wore a baseball cap low over his face and carried a cheap backpack slung over one shoulder. He entered through the warehouse entrance, blending into the steady flow of workers arriving for their shifts. No one spared him a second glance, and he felt an odd mix of relief and trepidation. For the first time in years, he wasn't Ethan Mitchell, the CEO. He was just Matt, the new hire. As he joined the orientation led by a bored-looking supervisor, Ethan scanned the room. The employees around him were a mix of personalities, some quiet and focused, others chatting animatedly. One man, tall and confident, leaned against the wall with a smirk, cracking jokes that drew laughter from a small group. Ethan's instincts sharpened as he recognized the man from the conversation he'd overheard the day before. This had to be Cameron. Ethan kept his distance, observing quietly as Cameron's jokes grew bolder, his tone laced with an arrogance that grated on Ethan's nerves. There was something in Cameron's posture, the way he carried himself, that hinted at a sense of entitlement. Ethan made a mental note to watch him closely. The day dragged on as Ethan was assigned menial tasks, stacking boxes, taking inventory, and cleaning equipment. He worked alongside a woman named Mia, who seemed kind but distracted. Her movements were hesitant, her eyes darting nervously whenever the supervisor passed by. At one point, Ethan caught her slipping a small item into her pocket, a roll of tape, almost insignificant, but enough to confirm his suspicions. Mia noticed his gaze and froze, her face flushing with guilt. Ethan said nothing, simply turning back to his task. He'd have to handle this carefully. There was more to her story, he was sure of it. By the end of the day, Ethan was exhausted but determined. He had learned enough to confirm that something was deeply wrong, but he still had more questions than answers. As he left the warehouse, he glanced back at the team he was now a part of, their laughter and chatter echoing in the evening air. He was no longer just an outsider looking in. He was in the thick of it now, and he wouldn't stop until he uncovered the truth. Ethan returned to the warehouse the next day, his muscles still sore from the physical labor he hadn't done in years. The soreness served as a humbling reminder of the effort it took to keep the business running at its core level. This time, he arrived early enough to watch the staff trickle in. Some came with bleary eyes, clutching cups of coffee. Others joked and laughed, their camaraderie evident. Ethan observed from a distance, noting the way smaller cliques naturally formed. Cameron, as expected, was at the center of one such group, his booming laughter and easy charisma drawing people to him like moths to a flame. Ethan kept his head down, slipping into the flow of the morning tasks. He was assigned to inventory counting with Mia again, and though she greeted him politely, she avoided eye contact. She seemed more tense than the day before, her movements quick and deliberate, as though trying to avoid any unnecessary attention. Ethan decided to test the waters. "So, how long have you been here?" he asked casually, breaking the silence. "About a year," Mia replied, her voice tight. She didn't look at him, her focus on scanning barcodes. "Do you like it?" Ethan pressed, keeping his tone light. Mia hesitated, her hand pausing mid-scan. "It's a job," she said finally. Her tone was clipped, and Ethan could hear the weight behind her words. There was no pride, no passion, just resignation. Ethan was about to push further when Cameron strolled by, a cocky grin plastered on his face. He clapped Ethan on the shoulder, startling him. "Matt, right? The new guy?" Cameron asked, his tone overly friendly. "That's me," Ethan replied, forcing a grin. "Stick with me, and you'll learn the ropes fast," Cameron said, his voice dripping with confidence. "This place isn't so bad once you figure out how to work it. Make it worth your time." Ethan raised an eyebrow, but didn't respond. Cameron's words hung in the air, vague yet telling. Ethan felt a flash of anger, but forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't afford to tip his hand just yet. As the day progressed, Ethan's observations began to paint a clearer picture. Cameron was the ringleader, no doubt about it. He had a way of charming the others, spinning stories and jokes that made him the center of attention. But there was an edge to him, a subtle arrogance that grated on Ethan. It wasn't just about stealing. It was the entitlement, the belief that he could take whatever he wanted without consequence. Mia, on the other hand, was a puzzle. She worked hard, her brow furrowed in concentration, but there was a tension in her shoulders that didn't go unnoticed. At one point, Ethan caught her glancing nervously toward the security cameras, as if they were watching her every move. It was clear she was struggling with something deeper than just her actions. During the lunch break, Ethan took a seat in the corner of the break room, deliberately isolating himself to see if anyone would approach. Sure enough, Liam, the quiet and reserved employee he'd noticed before, sat down across from him. Liam was tall and lean, with a serious expression that rarely wavered. "You're new," Liam said, his voice low. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "Second day." Liam nodded, studying him for a moment. "Word of advice, don't get too close to Cameron." Ethan tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "Why's that?" Liam leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's trouble. Likes to push boundaries. A lot of people here follow him because they think it's easier than standing up to him, but it's not worth it." Ethan could sense the hesitation in Liam's voice, the way his words carried the weight of personal experience. "Why don't you say something?" Ethan asked carefully. Liam's eyes darkened. "I tried once. Didn't end well. Let's just say people here don't like snitches." The words hung heavy between them, and Ethan felt a surge of respect for Liam's quiet integrity. He could see the internal struggle in the young man's face, the desire to do what was right, battling against the fear of isolation. As the break ended, Ethan thanked Liam for the advice, his mind spinning with new possibilities. Liam could be an ally, but he was clearly hesitant to step into the spotlight. Cameron's influence ran deep, and Ethan needed to find a way to unravel it without turning the entire team against him. Later that afternoon, Ethan caught another glimpse of Cameron in action. The ringleader was in the stockroom with a few others, his voice carrying just loud enough for Ethan to hear from around the corner. "Look, it's not like they'll notice. We're just taking what we're owed," Cameron said, holding up a small box of supplies. "This place makes a fortune. What's a few freebies to us?" The others laughed nervously, some nodding in agreement. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to remain still, listening. Cameron's words weren't just self-serving, they were manipulative, designed to justify his actions while pulling others into his web. It was a dangerous dynamic, one that could easily spiral out of control. As the day came to an end, Ethan left the warehouse with a heavy heart. He had seen enough to confirm that the problem ran deeper than he'd feared. Cameron wasn't just a bad influence, he was a threat to the integrity of the entire team. But Ethan also knew that solving this wouldn't be as simple as firing one man. He needed a plan, a way to expose the truth while giving the others a chance to redeem themselves. Walking to his car, Ethan glanced back at the warehouse, its windows glowing faintly in the fading light. This wasn't just about protecting his business anymore. It was about rebuilding trust, about proving that honesty and hard work still mattered. And if Cameron thought he could keep playing his games, he was about to learn how wrong he was. The following morning, Ethan arrived early again, his resolve sharpening with each passing hour. He spent the first half of his shift silently observing. Cameron's confidence was starting to grate on him. The man walked around like he owned the place, flashing a cocky grin at everyone, joking about how the higher-ups didn't care about them, so why should they care about the rules? Ethan busied himself with stacking crates, his ears tuned to every word. Cameron's hold on the staff was undeniable. He had a way of framing his actions as rebellion, as if they were all part of some noble cause against an indifferent system. Ethan had heard enough of these speeches in his early days as a struggling entrepreneur to recognize the rhetoric, an excuse to justify entitlement. As Ethan loaded boxes into the back of a delivery truck, Mia appeared at his side, her expression hesitant. "Hey," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hey," Ethan replied, wiping his hands on his jeans. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before speaking. "You didn't mention anything about yesterday, right? You know, about the tape?" Ethan finished for her, keeping his tone even. Mia's face flushed, and she nodded quickly. "Look, I know it was stupid. I just—" She broke off, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "It's not like I do it all the time. It's just, things have been hard lately." Ethan studied her for a moment, her guilt written all over her face. He softened his voice, making sure his tone didn't sound accusatory. "Hard how?" Mia glanced around the warehouse, making sure no one was within earshot. "My son," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "He's been sick. Hospital bills, medicine. It's a lot. And daycare's expensive, too. I'm just trying to get by, you know." Cameron said it's no big deal, that the company can afford it. Ethan's jaw tightened. Cameron's influence was deeper than he'd realized. It wasn't just about taking items. It was about preying on vulnerabilities, using people's struggles to justify his own greed. Ethan felt a flicker of anger, but quickly tamped it down. Mia wasn't the enemy here. "Have you talked to anyone about it?" "Management?" Ethan asked. Mia let out a bitter laugh. "What's the point? They don't care about us. We're just numbers to them. You work your hours, you get your paycheck, and that's it." Her words stung more than she knew. Ethan nodded slowly, masking his reaction. "I get it," he said simply. "But just be careful, okay?" Mia's eyes darted up to meet his, searching his face for judgment. When she didn't find any, she gave a small nod and walked away, her shoulders still weighed down by invisible burdens. Ethan watched her go, a knot forming in his stomach. He couldn't help but feel partially responsible. If she truly believed the company didn't care, it meant he had failed as a leader. That thought lingered with him as he returned to his tasks. As the day progressed, Ethan found himself drawn to Liam again. The younger man worked quietly, efficiently, avoiding the drama that seemed to swirl around Cameron. When their paths crossed in the stockroom, Ethan decided to strike up a conversation. "You've been here a while, right?" Ethan asked, leaning casually against a shelf. "3 years," Liam replied without looking up, his focus on restocking a row of supplies. "And you've seen how things work here," Ethan said, lowering his voice. "What do you think about all this?" Liam froze for a moment, his hand hovering over a box. He looked at Ethan with narrowed eyes, his gaze sharp and assessing. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I mean the way some people here act like the rules don't apply to them, like Cameron." Liam's expression darkened, and he shook his head. "He's been like that since day one. Acts like he runs the place, like he's doing everyone a favor by being here. A lot of people follow him because they're scared of him, or because he makes it sound like he's looking out for them. But it's all about him. Always has been." "Why doesn't anyone say anything?" Ethan asked. Liam let out a bitter laugh. "Because it doesn't matter. People like Cameron always land on their feet. And the rest of us? We just get left to clean up the mess." There was a weary cynicism in Liam's tone that struck a chord with Ethan. This wasn't just about one man's bad behavior. It was about a culture of silence and fear. If Ethan wanted to fix this, he needed to address the root of the problem, not just the symptoms. Later that afternoon, Ethan decided to set a trap. He arranged a pallet of high-value items, electronics, small appliances, in a corner of the stockroom, deliberately leaving it unattended. Then he positioned himself nearby, out of sight, but close enough to watch. Sure enough, it didn't take long for Cameron to appear, his eyes lighting up when he saw the stack. Ethan held his breath as Cameron looked around, making sure no one was watching. Then, with practiced ease, he slipped a small box into his bag and strolled away, as if nothing had happened. Ethan's blood boiled, but he forced himself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to confront him. Not yet. As the day wound down, Ethan felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had all the pieces of the puzzle now: Cameron's arrogance, Mia's desperation, Liam's resignation. The theft was just a symptom of a larger problem, a lack of trust, of connection, of accountability. If he wanted to fix this, he'd need to do more than catch Cameron red-handed. He'd need to rebuild the foundation of his company, brick by brick. Ethan left the warehouse that evening with a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer just an observer. He was a man with a plan. And Cameron? Cameron's days of unchecked arrogance were numbered. The following day, Ethan's plan began to take shape. He arrived at the warehouse earlier than usual, reviewing the setup he had orchestrated the night before. Overnight, he had arranged for several new security measures to be subtly implemented: hidden cameras placed strategically around the stockroom, and key areas where theft was most likely to occur. He wasn't ready to reveal himself or confront anyone just yet. He needed irrefutable evidence and a way to address the deeper issues plaguing his team. As the morning routine got underway, Ethan blended seamlessly into the flow of work. Cameron's smug demeanor was as grating as ever. He greeted everyone loudly, tossing casual insults masked as jokes to those who didn't align with his clique. Ethan watched the group dynamics closely, noting how Cameron's charisma kept the others in line. Even those who didn't fully agree with him seemed unwilling to challenge his authority, content to ride along for the sake of avoiding conflict. Mid-morning, Ethan found himself paired with Mia again. She seemed even more withdrawn than the day before, her usual nervousness now tinged with a palpable sense of dread. He decided to test the waters once more, keeping his voice low as they worked. "Mia," he said gently, "about yesterday, what Cameron told you, do you really think it's worth it? Taking things, I mean." She froze for a moment, her hand hovering over a box she was scanning. "I don't know," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "It's not like I'm proud of it, but sometimes you just do what you have to do." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "What if there was another way? Something that didn't make you feel like this?" Mia glanced at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "What are you talking about?" "I'm just saying," Ethan replied carefully. "Maybe there's more help available than you think. Sometimes you just have to ask." Mia let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You don't get it. People like Cameron, they make it so you feel like you don't have a choice. And management? They don't care. They just look at numbers, not people." Ethan didn't press further. He could see the hopelessness in her expression, the weight of her struggles pulling her down. He would need to show her, and the others, that things could be different. Around midday, Ethan caught Liam in the break room. The younger man was sitting alone, eating a sandwich in silence. Ethan sat across from him, keeping his tone casual as he started a conversation. "Liam, can I ask you something?" Ethan said, after a few moments of small talk. Liam looked up, his expression guarded. "Depends on what it is." "Why do you stay?" Ethan asked simply. "If you don't like how things are here, why not leave?" Liam hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Because it's not that easy. I've got bills to pay just like everyone else. And honestly, I don't hate the job. I just hate how people like Cameron get away with everything while the rest of us keep our heads down and take the blame." Ethan nodded slowly. "What if you didn't have to keep your head down? What if you could do something about it?" Liam frowned, his eyes narrowing. "What are you getting at?" "I'm just saying," Ethan replied carefully, "sometimes it only takes one person to stand up and make a difference." Liam stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a humorless chuckle. "You're either really naive or really stubborn. Either way, good luck with that." Ethan didn't push further, but he could tell his words had struck a chord. Liam might not have been ready to act yet, but the seed of doubt in Cameron's authority had been planted. As the day wore on, Ethan monitored the hidden cameras discreetly during his breaks. The footage confirmed what he already suspected. Cameron was brazen in his theft, taking items almost daily, and encouraging others to do the same. Mia's actions, though smaller in scale, were clearly driven by desperation. Others were complicit, though their participation seemed more about following Cameron's lead than genuine malice. By late afternoon, Ethan decided it was time to set his plan into motion. He arranged for a team meeting at the end of the day, under the guise of a routine warehouse check-in. The staff gathered in the break room, their expressions ranging from bored to mildly curious. Cameron leaned casually against the wall, his smirk firmly in place. Mia sat near the back, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, while Liam lingered near the door, his posture tense. Ethan, still in his disguise as Matt, stood near the center of the room. He cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "I've been here a few days now," he began, keeping his tone even, "and I've noticed a few things about how this place works." Cameron snorted, muttering something under his breath that drew a few chuckles from his group. Ethan ignored him, continuing, "I think there's a lot of good people here, hard workers. But I also think there's some things happening that aren't right. Things that hurt everyone whether they realize it or not." The room fell silent, tension crackling in the air. Cameron's smirk faltered slightly, his eyes narrowing. "What are you trying to say, new guy?" he asked, his tone sharp. Ethan met his gaze steadily. "I'm saying that some people here think they can take whatever they want, whenever they want, and that it won't catch up to them, but it does. It always does." For the first time, Cameron seemed genuinely unsettled. He pushed off the wall, stepping forward. "You've got a lot of nerve talking like that when you've only been here 5 minutes." Ethan smiled faintly, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he was pushing the limits, but he wasn't done yet. "Sometimes 5 minutes is all it takes to see what's really going on," he said evenly, "and sometimes it's all the time you need to make a change." The room was electric with unspoken tension as Ethan's words hung in the air. He could see the uncertainty flickering in Cameron's eyes, the way Mia's expression shifted from fear to something closer to hope. Liam stood a little straighter, his jaw set. Ethan knew he had their attention now. The stage was set for what came next. The break room remained deathly silent, the air so thick with tension it felt like everyone was holding their breath. Cameron's confident smirk had been replaced by a guarded expression, his eyes darting to his clique for reassurance. Some of them avoided his gaze, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Mia stared down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously, while Liam's posture stiffened, a flicker of curiosity flashing across his face. Ethan knew he couldn't let the tension dissipate. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't about pointing fingers, at least not yet. It's about understanding how this kind of behavior affects everyone here. The small stuff, the things that people think don't matter, they add up. They hurt the company, sure, but they also hurt the team. The people who work hard and play by the rules end up paying the price." Cameron scoffed loudly, crossing his arms over his chest. "Oh, give me a break. You sound like one of those corporate videos they make us watch during training. Let me guess, you're going to tell us to respect the company values next?" His voice dripped with sarcasm, drawing a few hesitant chuckles from his usual followers. Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he leveled his gaze at Cameron, his expression unreadable. "Funny thing about values," he said quietly. "They don't mean anything unless people are held accountable. You think this is just about taking a few freebies? It's not. It's about trust. And right now, that's in short supply." The words landed like a hammer. Cameron's smirk faltered, and Ethan could see the cracks beginning to form. His clique exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado waning. Mia shifted in her seat, glancing up at Ethan with something that almost resembled gratitude. Liam, meanwhile, leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, watching intently. Ethan let the silence stretch, giving his words time to sink in. Then he delivered the next blow. "I know what's been going on," he said, his voice steady. "I've seen it with my own eyes, and I can prove it." The room erupted into murmurs, the employees exchanging nervous whispers. Cameron stiffened, his jaw tightening. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his tone defensive. Ethan's expression didn't waver. "I'm talking about theft, about people who think the rules don't apply to them, about the damage it does, not just to the company, but to the people who count on it for their livelihoods." Cameron took a step forward, his voice rising. "You've got no proof. You're just some new guy trying to act like you know everything." Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile, a flicker of steel in his eyes. "You're right. I'm new here. But I'm not who you think I am." The murmurs in the room grew louder, confusion and curiosity rippling through the crowd. Cameron froze, his bravado faltering. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ethan took a deep breath, his heart pounding as he prepared for the reveal. Slowly, he reached up and removed the baseball cap he'd been wearing, letting it drop onto the table. He straightened his posture, the casual slouch he'd adopted over the past few days disappearing, as he stood tall, his commanding presence unmistakable. "I'm Ethan Mitchell," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The CEO of this company." The room fell into stunned silence. For a moment it felt like time had stopped, every pair of eyes fixed on Ethan as the weight of his words sank in. Mia's mouth fell open in shock, her face pale. Liam's expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief, his arms dropping to his sides. Even Cameron seemed momentarily speechless, his confident facade crumbling as he stared at Ethan with wide eyes. Ethan let the silence linger for a moment before continuing. "I came here because I needed to see for myself what was happening. I didn't want second-hand reports or excuses. I wanted the truth, and now I have it." Cameron recovered quickly, though the edge of panic in his voice was impossible to miss. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You can't just come in here and start accusing people without proof." Ethan's gaze sharpened. "Proof?" he repeated. "I have plenty of proof. I've seen it with my own eyes. And I've also been reviewing footage from the security cameras we installed recently." A ripple of shock ran through the room. Cameron's face turned an ashen shade of gray, his confidence visibly cracking. "Cameras?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's right," Ethan said evenly. "And they've captured everything, every stolen item, every excuse, every justification." The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping as the employees processed the revelation. Cameron's usual followers looked uneasy, their loyalty wavering now that they realized the consequences of their actions. Mia buried her face in her hands while Liam watched in silence, his expression unreadable. Ethan raised a hand and the noise subsided. "Here's the deal," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone, but I also won't tolerate dishonesty or theft. This is your chance to come clean. If you've taken something, no matter how small, I want you to own up to it. If you're honest, we'll work through this together. But if you lie, if you try to cover it up, the consequences will be much worse." The employees exchanged nervous glances, the weight of Ethan's words pressing down on them. Cameron stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides, his expression unreadable. Ethan could see the gears turning in his mind, the calculations as he tried to figure out his next move. Ethan stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the room. "The choice is yours," he said simply. "But know this, everything you do from this moment on will determine what kind of person you are. This is your chance to do the right thing." The room fell silent again, the weight of Ethan's words hanging heavy in the air. One by one, the employees began to look down, the realization of their actions sinking in. Ethan watched, waiting, knowing this was the moment that would define everything. The silence in the room stretched unbearably, broken only by the faint hum of the break-room refrigerator. Ethan's eyes scanned the group, watching as guilt and uncertainty flickered across their faces. No one dared to move at first, but the tension was palpable, a slow-building storm waiting to break. Mia was the first to speak. Her voice was small, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the oppressive quiet like a knife. "I took something," she admitted, her hands trembling as she twisted them in her lap. "Just little things. Tape. Supplies. Her voice cracked, and she looked down, her face flushed with shame. "I was desperate." Ethan softened his expression, his tone gentle but steady. "Thank you for being honest, Mia. That takes courage." Her eyes darted to his, searching for judgment, but finding none. She gave a small nod, her shoulders sagging as though a weight had been lifted. Encouraged by Mia's confession, a few more employees began to murmur their admissions. One man admitted to taking office supplies here and there. Another confessed to pocketing small items from the stockroom, thinking it wouldn't matter. The ripple effect was undeniable, a wave of hesitant honesty spreading through the room as the employees came to terms with their actions. Ethan listened carefully to each confession, his expression never wavering. For every admission, he gave a measured response, acknowledging their honesty while emphasizing the importance of accountability. But through it all, one person remained silent: Cameron. Cameron stood near the edge of the group, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw clenched so hard it looked like it might crack. His usual bravado had evaporated, replaced by a simmering tension that threatened to boil over. Ethan turned his attention to him, his gaze steady and unyielding. "Cameron," Ethan said evenly, "do you have anything you'd like to say?" For a moment, Cameron didn't respond. The room seemed to hold its breath, every pair of eyes fixed on him. Finally, he let out a sharp laugh, the sound harsh and hollow. "You're kidding me, right?" he sneered. "You think I'm going to stand here and let you treat me like some kind of criminal? Over what? A few stupid supplies?" Ethan didn't flinch. "This isn't about the supplies, Cameron. It's about the choices you've made, the example you've set for the people around you." Cameron's eyes narrowed, his voice rising. "Spare me the lecture. You think you're better than me because you sit in some fancy office all day? You don't know what it's like to be down here, working for scraps while you rake in the profits." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone calm. "You're right about one thing, Cameron. I don't know what it's like to be you. But I do know what it's like to work hard for something and to take pride in doing the right thing. What I see here isn't about survival or fairness, it's about entitlement. You've convinced yourself that you deserve to take whatever you want, and you've dragged other people down with you." Cameron's face flushed red, his fists clenching at his sides. "You don't know anything about me," he spat. "You think you can just waltz in here and play the hero? You don't have a clue what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, to feel like no one gives a damn about you." Ethan took a step closer, his voice steady but firm. "You're right. I don't know your struggles. But I know this. What you're doing isn't helping anyone. It's only making things worse, and you're not just stealing from the company, you're stealing from your co-workers, from the people who trust you. You've made yourself the center of this mess, and now it's time to take responsibility." The room was so quiet that even a pin drop would have echoed. Cameron's defiance flickered, his gaze darting around the room as though searching for an ally. But the expressions on the faces of his clique told him everything he needed to know. They weren't standing with him anymore. They were looking down, ashamed, unwilling to meet his eyes. For a moment it seemed as though Cameron might lash out, his entire body taut with tension. But then something shifted. The fight drained from his posture, replaced by something that looked almost like resignation. He shook his head, letting out a bitter laugh. "Fine," he muttered. "Yeah, I took stuff. So what? Go ahead, do whatever you're going to do." Ethan held his gaze, the weight of the moment pressing down on them both. "Thank you for being honest," he said finally. "But this isn't the end of the conversation. There will be consequences, Cameron, not just for you, but for everyone involved. This isn't something I can ignore." Cameron didn't respond. He simply turned and walked toward the door, his shoulders hunched. The room remained silent as he left, the sound of the door closing behind him, echoing loudly in the stillness. Ethan turned back to the group, his expression softening. "I know this hasn't been easy," he said quietly, "but today isn't just about consequences. It's about a fresh start. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next." The employees exchanged uncertain glances, their faces a mixture of relief, guilt, and hope. Ethan could see the wheels turning in their minds, the slow realization that this was an opportunity to rebuild, not just the company, but themselves. "We're going to make some changes," Ethan continued, "to rebuild trust, to support each other better, and to make sure everyone here feels valued. But that starts with accountability. If you're willing to move forward with honesty and integrity, I'm willing to meet you halfway." As the meeting ended, the employees filed out one by one, their expressions heavy with thought. Mia paused on her way out, glancing back at Ethan. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, offering her a small smile. "Thank you for being honest," he replied. As the room emptied, Ethan exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging with the weight of the day. The first step was always the hardest, but he knew it was only the beginning. There was still work to be done, bridges to rebuild, trust to restore. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. Change was never easy, but it was possible, and he was ready to see it through. Ethan stood alone in the break room, staring at the empty chairs and the faint coffee stains on the table, remnants of a meeting that felt like a battlefield. The air still seemed charged with the weight of everything that had unfolded, but for the first time in days, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. He knew the hard part wasn't over. It was just beginning. As he walked back toward the office, Ethan's thoughts churned with the events of the day. Cameron's brazen defiance and ultimate confession had been a turning point, but it wasn't enough to stop there. If he wanted to rebuild trust within the team and salvage the integrity of his business, he needed to follow through on his promises with action. This wasn't just about consequences, it was about creating a culture where honesty, accountability, and support weren't exceptions, but the rule. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the warehouse earlier than usual, a stack of papers tucked under his arm. He had spent the night drafting a plan, a way to address the problems he had uncovered while giving everyone a chance to move forward. He called another meeting before the workday officially began, gathering the team in the break room once more. The atmosphere was tense but less combative than before, the weight of uncertainty still palpable. "Good morning," Ethan began, his tone calm but authoritative. "First, I want to thank those of you who were honest yesterday. Admitting when we've made mistakes isn't easy, but it's an important first step. Today, I want to talk about how we move forward." He set the stack of papers on the table, spreading them out so everyone could see. They were outlines of new policies, initiatives, and plans for the team. "I've put together a plan that addresses what I've seen and heard over the past few days. This isn't just about fixing what's broken, it's about building something better for all of us." He pointed to one of the documents. "First, we're implementing a zero-tolerance policy for theft. Moving forward, anyone caught stealing will face immediate termination. That might sound harsh, but it's necessary to protect the integrity of this team and this company." The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Ethan could see some uneasy expressions, but he pressed on. "That said, I also understand that some of you have been dealing with personal struggles that may have influenced your decisions. To address that, we're introducing an employee assistance program. This will include financial counseling, access to healthcare resources, and a small emergency fund for those who need it. No one here should feel like they have to resort to theft just to get by." Mia's head shot up at that, her wide eyes betraying a mixture of disbelief and hope. Ethan met her gaze briefly, offering a small nod before continuing. "We're also going to focus on rebuilding trust. That means more transparency, better communication, and opportunities for everyone to voice their concerns. Starting next week, I'll be holding open office hours every Friday. If you have questions, ideas, or problems you want to discuss, my door will be open." Ethan paused, scanning the room. "Finally, I want to address leadership. What I saw over the past few days showed me that we need stronger, more reliable leaders who can set the right example. That's why I'm promoting Liam to team lead." Liam's eyes widened in shock, his posture going rigid. "Me?" he blurted out, his voice filled with disbelief. Ethan smiled. "Yes, you. You've shown integrity, even when it wasn't easy. That's exactly what this team needs right now. I believe in your ability to step up and lead." Liam opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, he nodded slowly, his expression a mixture of gratitude and determination. Ethan turned back to the group. "This isn't going to be an overnight fix. Change takes time, and it takes effort from all of us. But I'm committed to making this work. I hope you are too." As the meeting ended and the team dispersed, Ethan noticed a subtle shift in the air. The tension hadn't disappeared entirely, but there was something else now, a sense of possibility, of cautious optimism. People lingered in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. Mia approached him hesitantly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, her voice trembling slightly, I wanted to say thank you for giving us another chance, for giving me another chance." Ethan smiled warmly, his tone reassuring. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Mia. Just make the most of it." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes as she stepped away. Ethan watched her go, a sense of satisfaction settling over him. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. The day passed with an energy that felt different from before. People worked harder, their focus sharper, their interactions less tinged with the tension that had once been so pervasive. Liam took to his new role with quiet determination, stepping into his responsibilities with a confidence that grew as the hours ticked by. Even Cameron, though absent, seemed to cast less of a shadow over the team. By the time Ethan returned to his office that evening, he felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and hope. He glanced at the photo on his desk, a picture of him years ago, standing in front of the company's first storefront, his smile wide with pride. It had been a long journey to get here, and there was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was moving in the right direction. As he leaned back in his chair, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The company wasn't just a business, it was a community, and though it had faltered, though mistakes had been made, it was still worth fighting for. With that thought, Ethan closed his eyes, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of peace, knowing that the foundations of something stronger were finally being laid.